The Fire Within, or the original French title Le Feu Follet, is a 1963 film and is based on the novel of the same name by Pierre Drieux La Rochelle. The Fire Within is one of the strongest works in the oeuvre of the director Louis Malle, who gave us other film jewels such as Elevator to the Gallows, Murmur of the Heart, My Dinner with Andre, or Goodbye Children. But The Fire Within is probably the film that has lost the least of its topicality, as it's also shown by Oslo August 31st by Joachim Trier, the second film we will be dealing with today, which is far more than a simple homage to Louis Malle's masterpiece. Unfortunately, the term existentialism has often been degraded to a catchphrase that includes clichés such as the philosopher in a black turtleneck or far too general questions such as the meaning of life. But although the concept of existentialism is still on the lips of many, especially among the younger generation who want to find a way out of their thrownness, Geworfenheit, into an actual existence, Eigentlichkeit. The ideology of existentialism is not brought out of its historical period, or worse, it becomes very superficial, abused by some motivational gurus or coaches. Now, in the case of The Fire Within, the use of the term is quite appropriate because it also reflects certain characteristics of the French existentialism movement, and in the clinic you often hear the war of words between the two intellectuals who, among other things, also mentions Sartre's main work. Of course, the intellectual duels are never as extensive as those between Settembrini and Nafta on the Magic Mountain. But there are also very small parallels between the protagonist Alain Leroy and Hans Castorp, both of whom leave the regular everyday life of the sanatorium to face death. Although Alain Leroy returns one more and commits suicide at the end in Versailles. Another important aspect of The Fire Within is the love and desire or non-desire of women. In the opening scene, we see Alain after a sexual encounter with a friend who, after a moment of rest, directly mentions his sadness. Otherwise, this is often only carried out behind his back, whereby we as viewers see that interruption or that inner obstacle between Alain and his environment for the first time. He flees back to the regular routine of the clinic, rejects further advances from his friend, as well as the possibility of traveling to his wife in New York. Oslo, August 31st, opens the film with the same opening scene, but with no verbal communication between the woman and Anders at all. In the next scene, we witnessed a failed suicide attempt. Anders decides to drown himself in the lake, and he returns to rehab as a result. Although Alain and Anders are the same age in a very similar situation, there are some differences between the two. Alain, the alcoholic, reacts to his surroundings with a deep melancholy and has the hope deep down that he is not yet completely lost. Something could happen that he has been waiting for so long. Anders, the heroin addict, on the other hand, seems much more distant and a lot more jaded. He realizes that in the present age it is too late for him to start clean again, and at 34 he clearly sees the obstacles of a restart. The 6-year gap in his CV overshadows his degrees and his quite educated background. At the end of the film, we see the house in which he grew up in. But in the times of LinkedIn, a 6-year gap in the CV is almost a death blow, because this frankness of many employers is of course only a facade, and a productive worker who does not involve any risk naturally turns out to be the better option. Anders is also aware of this, abruptly walking away from the job interview and throwing his resume in the trash. Unlike Alain in the 1960s, where his alcoholism is fixed only in the gossip, the talking, das Gerede of those around him. On the other hand, Anders' addiction has left an indelible stain on his person in the 2010s. Now back to the everyday life at Alain's clinic. After we got an impression of his living environment with all the photographs, we see that Alain is in possession of a gun. He is interrupted by the doctor, who now tells him that he has long since been cured and that it is time now to leave the clinic. So here is the difference to the Magic Mountain. He is not kept in the sanatorium. Alain resists this request but finally agrees. In this way, he is pushed out of his regular routine of the clinic and confronted with his freedom. The doctor recommends that he should spend time with his wife and under no circumstances should go to Paris. But Alain ignores his words and then makes his way to Paris to visit his circle of friends after all these years. Alain, like Anders, firstly goes to their apparently closest friend who has completely devoted himself to an average bourgeois family existence. Strolling around after dinner, Alain confronts his friend about the mediocrity of his lifestyle while also giving us a glimpse of his own anxiety. Despite being in his 30s, he continues to rebel against conformism, the bourgeois norm, and that narrow-minded attitude towards their being. When his friend asks him what he's been up to for the past few years, Alain replies that he's been waiting for something to happen and to pass the time he started drinking. Alas, last years also consist of a gilded mediocrity, replies his friend, and Alain is aware of this. But he refuses to grow up. He resolutely rejects the mediocrity of that age and the norms that come from it. But this still leaves him stuck in a kind of adolescence. I don't want to grow old, Alain mentions in conversation, whereupon his friend asks whether youth was really as fulfilling as it was in his memory and whether that wasn't just a lie. When the girls or young women walk past him, you see this contrast between them and Alain, the joy of life, the blossoming of youth, life that you want to touch. But he simply cannot surrender to this world, something in him resists it, and he rejects the world of his friend and life itself. Alain continues to stroll through Paris, and after another stop at an old acquaintance, he sits down in a cafe, resulting in an iconic scene that has its place in film history. Throughout the film, you could already hear the melancholy sound of Erik Satie's Gnossienne and Gymnopédie, which perfectly underscore the events. It is here in this scene and that the first Gnossienne is playing. This piece surrounds quite a popularity today, and the mood that this piece creates, combined with the imagery, perfectly reflects this detachment from Alain to his environment. The camera alternates between cuts to the tumult of the world and Alain's sadness, while the scenes of his surroundings are shown with such a distant indifference that, for example, come close to the observations of Antoine Roquentin in Jean-Paul Sartre's Nausea. But then it happens, Alain reaches for alcohol. The cafe scene in Oslo, August 31st, on the other hand, comes without any music at all, and instead we witness the gossip that surrounds Anders. That scene is even more oppressive, sticks the finger even deeper into the wound, and gives an honest insight into our current Western conditio humana. He overhears conversations about well-known kindergarten places in downtown Oslo, or the small talk or the getting to know you phase of a first date, in which they very superficially mention their piano repertoire. She likes to play classical music, and of course the name comes up straight away, and only on Für Elise, probably without the middle section and also the first bars of the Mondschein Sonate. And her date doesn't want to focus on learning great music, that's far too exhausting for him, but rather devotes himself to jazz improvisation. Adorno would have left the cafe right away. Of course, this can mean a lot. Maybe he's an excellent jazz pianist, but especially in the age of YouTube, there are dozens of videos that mostly show men who want to seduce their date to sex in a very cliché, superficial manner, how to play a couple of notes on a piano in a few minutes without practicing or having or having any basis in music theory. It is never modulated into another key. Of course, you stay in C major, then the coach says you only need the white keys, then it sounds like most piano ballads on the radio. In the left hand, an arpeggiated triad from C to F and back again, and with the right hand, the white keys are pressed pathetically and purely arbitrarily. While this might not be a bad practice at the beginning of the piano learning process, you get a pretty good feel for the keyboard. The problem is the superficial acquisition of interests in our present day, this faking of depth and character to generate respect and prestige from others. Learning a musical instrument is no longer aimed at our interest in music or after hearing a certain piece, which one then wants to play, but to use it as a status symbol in conversations or on social media. Then Anders focuses on two young women who write down their life goals on their laptops, and when they read out their goals, a dystopia is almost reached within the framework of Radiohead's Fitter Happier. While the young woman talks about utopian family planning, maintaining an ideal weight, or planning to write down her own novel, the camera follows another woman in sportswear who is walking past the cafe. We are granted a small glimpse into the emptiness of her daily routine. We can see her exercising on a treadmill, shopping for groceries, and returning to an empty apartment, putting the milk in the fridge. But then the moment comes where the emptiness or meaninglessness pushes through the shell, confronts her with the lack of essence, insubstantiality of her existence. This moment happened a long time ago with Anders, as it did with Alain Leroy or Antoine Roquentin in Sartre's Nausea, who starts to see things only as present at hand, vorhanden, instead of the usual mode of being, ready to hand, zuhanden, through which he sees the lack of essence in the core of his existence, and that pure contingency of his existence becomes part of his nausea. But in the end, Antoine Roquentin comes to an important insight in his consciousness, which Anders and Alain unfortunately remain denied. This is the possibility, das Möglichsein of their existence. Unfortunately, Anders and Alain have forgotten their possibility or see it as a lifelong lie, while their nihilistic view of their surrounding denies them their salvation. Anders and Alain are both alone in a cafe, distant and alienated after failing to connect authentically with the world around them. One could assume that the suicide decision was made there. Alain begins to drink again, which puts him on his downward spiral, and Anders gets his overdose from the dealer. But both of them socialize again. They seek their essence in the others. Alain goes to an upper-class soiree, while Anders goes to a birthday party and then to a bar. There, a new light opens up for both of them, a light that they unfortunately neither desire nor can even touch, namely the light of the woman. Both don't seem to fit into their evening parties, but one woman takes care of them, stands allegorically for life, but unfortunately they also lead them to an important realization. In the climax of Le Feu Follet, Alain enters into a monologue in which he reveals the torment of his non-desire and his fear. As a result, Solange enters the scene acting as his light, and Alain sincerely tells her that she is life, but he cannot touch her, he can't feel her, and now he has to leave without ever having touched anything, beauty, goodness, and then he begs her to touch the unfortunate, to touch the damned, that she can work miracles in his eyes, that she should give him life. But his last complaint goes unheeded. With Anders, the meeting in the bar shifts to a bike ride through his hometown. At Vigeland Park, he stays a while longer with his friends and his love interest that he met before, and they go to an open-air swimming pool. They go skinny dipping, his love interest undresses in front of him, and before she goes into the water, she looks around at Anders again, but he does not accept that invitation. A little later the sun rises, a new day begins, but he also rejects the temptations of life. He goes back to his parents' house, wanders in his reminiscences, and then sits at the grand piano, plays a final piece, then shuts the sun out of his life by closing the curtains, and spends his final hours in the darkness of remains of better times. Alain went back to his familiar room in the clinic. The next morning he receives a phone call from Solange, who expresses interest in him, but Alain, like Anders, rejects the invitation. Despite the urgency, there was no reply from his wife to his telegram. It was the same for Anders, who talked onto his ex-girlfriend's voicemail dozens of times throughout the day, but never received a call back and called off his call for help near the end. Alain then picks up Scott F. Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, reads it to the last page, and then shoots himself in the heart with a revolver. The Fire Within and Oslo August 31st are two highly interesting character studies which have their own place in film history and are always highly topical. Maurice Ronet and Anders Danielsen Lie shine in their best roles, providing a voice for those lost individuals. Two honest and attentive portraits of two suicides are painted without morally judging their actions. In the end, there is no salvation and no deterministic sign that moves the protagonist to continue. Neither of them could tie the strings to their environment any tighter and were no longer able to love, and both of them knew this. They couldn't get around their inner obstacles themselves. They hoped for the help of others, but instead the obstacle became all the insurmountable. So thank you again for checking out this video essay on The Fire Within and Oslo August 31st. So in case you're interested in buying the physical copies, I will try to get one where the shipping will be worldwide. I have this personal Louis Malle Blu-ray collection, but it's just in French and German. So unfortunately, yes, there's one in English too, but most of them are in French and German, but there should be also alternatives. Maybe Criterion Collection has them, and the same with Oslo August 31st. It's also the Norwegian original, just with subtitles. So, but again, in today's age you can find most of them in streaming. So, but until then, I hope you enjoyed the essay, and I will definitely try to get back to make more videos here on a very broad range of themes. So in painting or with music. I'm also writing the script for self-portraits, so in painting, so in case you're interested, I try to make as many videos as possible. And I hope I will see you again. Until then, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you have something to say, write it down in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you might subscribe, and until then, we will see each other soon. Bye bye.